So, hello everyone. Some of you I can see, some I can't, but welcome. And I'm really excited to welcome you to this Center of Visual Arts seminar to launch Unlikely Journal for Creative Arts, issue number 6, Translating Ambiance. I'm Norie Neumark, founding editor of the journal. We're holding this event on Zoom, so we're all located in different places, as were the artists and scholars who contributed to this wonderful issue. This means there are a number of different traditional countries to be acknowledged, and feel free to add the country you are on in the comments panel. This event is being recorded, so your comments will be too. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that Kova is located in Naarm, on the sovereign unceded lands of the Boon Wurrung and Wurundjeri peoples of the Eastern Kulin Nation. Unlikely Journal is made here too. And I myself am proud to acknowledge the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung as the traditional custodians of the lands and waters of the place on which I speak from now. We at Unlikely and Kova pay our respects to elders past and present. We recognize, respect, and learn from their cultural heritage, beliefs, and relationship with country. This is an especially vital and inspiring connection for artists and writers working with place, as so many of those in translating Ambiance were. Before I turn over to the guest editor of the issue, Jordan Lacey, I'd like to briefly introduce the journal itself for those who have not yet encountered it. I'm just hoping to share my screen. So that's all there, I take it. Yep. As you can see, Unlikely is a transdisciplinary online journal that opens unexpected spaces for artistic exchange and scholarly conversations across mediums, disciplines, and continents. An experiment in form, each rich media issue explores a theme through live events and exhibitions, followed by peer-reviewed publication of creative arts works and scholarly essays. I want to underline the experimental and transdisciplinary aspects here because they're particularly important for creative practitioners whose work so often and so significantly crosses disciplinary boundaries. When we set up Unlikely, the esteemed editorial board, which you can see there, recognized that so often the journals to which creative artists and writers and scholars tried to submit were unable to value the transdisciplinarity of the contributions. And this meant that the forums for artist researchers' work to be shared, to be published, were not there. While each issue has turned out to be quite distinct in their approach, there are a number of underlying aims they all respond to. And I just want to quickly point to these. I'm hoping to engage you with this wonderful journal. So the journal aims to give space for the presentation of creative arts, works, and reflections that respond, as I said, to a particular theme. The focus on one theme means that each issue builds conversations and knowledge together. This gives space for artists to engage in direct and indirect conversations with other artists, scholars, theorists, and writers, and present their work in a critical, conversational, scholarly, and artistic context that values and promotes thinking through practice. Unlikely aims to give space for artists, emerging and established, to translate the aesthetics and poetics of their work into another writerly work, an essay in the deepest sense of that word. We hope this contributes to experimenting with and developing new ways of writing, from poetic experimentations to expanded autoethnographies. Unlikely offers an invitation too for theorists to be more playful and experimental if they choose. By offering a rich media format, the journal is especially responsive to the needs of artists to present their work in an appropriate format, a richness of media, rich media including performance, image, video, and sound. And as I said, each issue is very distinct in its theme and in the way the guest editors actually choose to approach it. And while this is not actually an expectation, I would note that environmental, ecological, and new materialist and post-colonial themes seem to run through the 6 issues so far. Just give you a quick flash look at the different issues. That's the first, feral. Then there was field work, cancelled. I mean, that's interesting, cancelled then, but in a different context. Art and herbarium, and reimagining Maralinga. I'd like to invite you to check out the journal for yourselves. I've just sort of flashed through after this event, and perhaps also to respond to our open invitation to guest edit a journal issue or present an ongoing project for the project space. So we've only got one project so far, which is Nature in the Dark, which is curated by our wonderful coordinator, Jan Brueggemeyer. And by the way, just foreshadowing what Nikos may be talking about, or what he's certainly written about in relation to large urban screens, the works in this project were shown on the big screen in Federation Square, Melbourne, which was very exciting. So Unlikely also acts as a publisher for books and ebooks. There's another coming soon, shortly, which is about the work of John Pascoe White, Kin, edited by N.A.J. Taylor. So that'll be up there soon. Watch this space. But finally, sadly, a bit of a disclaimer. While La Trobe University funded us to set up, and COVA now generously funds the upkeep of the site and costs to present each issue, we do not have an ongoing budget to pay editors and contributors, unfortunately. This is why we prefer to work with events which are already funded, so that artists are paid in that way, or to work with editors and curators who have other sources of funding. Speaking of COVA, let me now quickly thank COVA, and particularly Susie Fraser and Eleanor Simcoe, for hosting and facilitating this event. They're both super busy, and their support for this event is very much appreciated. So I want to turn now to the panel. Jordan Lacey, Luz María Sánchez Cardona, and Nikos Papastergiadis, who will speak in turn and then open to discussion. Rather than introduce them all now, I'll introduce each speaker before they speak. So first, Jordan Lacey. Jordan is a creative practitioner, transdisciplinary researcher, musician, and curator who specializes in soundscape design and the creation of public sound art installations. He brings his sonic practice to the urban in thinking and practicing ways to transform its everyday qualities. Jordan is the author of the very influential book Sonic Rupture, a practice-led approach to urban soundscape design, Bloomsbury 2016. Jordan was recently awarded a prestigious DECRA fellowship based at RMIT for his work around translating ambiance. Unlikely Journal is one of the places he's explored this through his own very important artistic and theoretical work and through his curation editing of this issue. I have to say that Jordan has really been an amazing editor with his commitment, insights, and generosity to contributors, giving so much particularly to emerging writers and artists. And for me personally, it's been a genuine pleasure to work with Jordan. If you want to find out more about Jordan, you can go over to his hiddensounds.com.au website. Okay, over to you, Jordan.
Well, thank you, Norie, for that introduction. And also my sincere thanks to Susie and Eleanor from COVA for organising today's discussion. And I have to say, I feel quite privileged to be speaking in the same forum as Norie, Luz and Nikos, all of whom are arts and artistic research scholars for whom I have great admiration and respect. So thank you for today. The Translating Ambience Journal edition, which I guest edited, as Norie has just described, emerged from an exhibition I curated at Yarra Sculpture Gallery in 2019, in which I invited 12 sound artists to create 9 installations. This exhibition was set up to test the idea and possibilities of translating ambiances. Before I discuss specific contributions to the journal, I want to spend just a little time on the meaning of ambience, translation, and the purpose of their combination. The term ambience is derived from the scholar Jean-Paul Thibault, who developed ambience theory, particularly the theory and practice of sonic ambience. This he achieved while carrying out his role as the director of Cresson, Centre for Sound Space and Urban Environment Research, based in Grenoble, France. For Thibault, ambiances are those mediums in which our bodies are continuously immersed, such as sound, light, air, rhythms, etc. These shape our perceptibilities of the world, as he puts it. That is, our perceptions continuously unfold according to the shifting mediums of everyday life, which in turn shapes our impressions and feelings of the world. Thibault is particularly interested in sonic ambiances. There are 3 reasons for this. Firstly, as I've mentioned, because he emerged through the Cresson Sound Laboratory, which has a specific interest in environmental sounds. Secondly, because of sound's ability to affect our sensing bodies. And thirdly, as a temporal medium, sonic events are uniquely able to be captured by field recording technologies. The reason that ambience, in this case, is spelt with an A, is that ambience, with an E, tends to consider the exterior conditions of ambient fields, such as sound, light, etc. Brian Eno's ambient music is an excellent example of this, and also Nikos's discussion of the screen in his chapter that was recommended reading is also an excellent example of this in the light context. However, ambience, as presented by Thibault, is much more focused on perception and therefore the experiencing body. As we will soon see, this distinction is important for the idea and practice of translating ambiances. Turning to translation, this is partly derived from the curator and theorist Nikos Papastergiadis, and I hope I pronounced his surname correctly. Papastergiadis is interested in how artists are able to translate what he calls codings from one situation into another situation. Now, a code can stand for anything, including language, objects, ideas, relations, etc., etc. He uses the example of the process by which a language can transform into Creole. He says that in the translation, something new is created, but at the same time, something is always left behind. He talks about the movement and dynamism of forms across surfaces, as he puts it, all of which he says are potentially movable. Understood as such, artistic practice becomes fluid, in motion, and able to translate meaning, form, or dynamic into another type of meaning, form, or dynamic. One can see here, I hope, the immediate applicability of sound, which, as many theorists tell us, including Christoph Cox, Salome Verglen, and Brandon LaBelle, is always in motion and continuously creating changing, effective relationships between bodies. So why put these 2 terms, ambience and translation, together? To understand this, we need to briefly turn our attention to urban design. This may seem unexpected, but in fact, there is a long relationship between sound and urban design called soundscape design. Indeed, we could connect Cresson with this history. I wondered if it was possible to imagine ways to transport restorative natural environments into urban spaces. I began to consider the landscapes that connect natural and urban spaces as a continuous surface, just as Nicolas Boreard describes it. I wondered if artists engaged in field recording practices might be able to transport the ambiances of nature into the urban. Now, as many ambience or atmosphere researchers will tell you, this is not possible. And why? Because an ambience is unique to a situation. That is, our perceptions are unique in any given moment, to any given situation, and this cannot be repeated. However, I believe this position changes if we consider it from the perspective of embodiment. The field recording artist is engaged in an embodied process when in the field. They are listening, recording, documenting. And while doing this, they are embodying a specific idiosyncratic experience of space. This experience is carried by the body, both the artistic body and the technological body. When the artist and their media files return to urban space, they are then in the position to recreate their experience, perhaps as an installation, as did the exhibiting artists I invited to the Translating Ambience exhibition. They do this by using both their bodily memory and the media files that they collect. This is the point at which translation takes place. Something new is created and something is left behind. That is, there is no attempt to recreate the original ambience, but to somehow transport the environmental effects carried by the body, both human and technological, into a new situation. So, to translate an ambience is to create the restorative and/or evocative effects of nature into an urban environment. And this is not the recreation of nature, but the artist's translation of their experiences of ambient mediums from one space into another. So I'll now turn to the website. I'll quickly share my screen. So firstly, I want to point out that a detailed description of the exhibition can be found at this link. This is the original exhibition, 2 clicks. It includes essays from various scholars, artistic descriptions from each of the artists, audio files, which you turn on here and access via these floating dots, a walkthrough video, and finally photos that can be enlarged. Each of these participating artists was invited to further translate their work into a written format for the textual and multimedia affordances as described by Norie just then are provided by Unlikely. Additionally, there was an international call for works, and after a review process, we ended up with 19 contributions broken up into 3 categories. The 19 can be seen here, as well as the editorial. These include, in the left column, exhibition translations, in which 6 of the artists chose to translate their works into textual and multimedia forms. This enabled them, including me, to dig deeper into their own processes and perhaps present specific angles that were less emphasised in the original installation works. Secondly, creative practice essays in the second column enabled myriad artists to contextualise their work within the figure of translating ambiances. That is, it provided a framework for the discussion of their practices. And lastly, in the third column, we have the scholarly articles, which invited theorists and artist researchers to contribute a scholarly work in relationship to the ambience and translation themes. I will briefly touch on each one by example to give a sense of what the journal is offering. Firstly, though, for a deeper understanding of the meaning of translating ambience in relationship to urban design, I want to touch on my essay. I am doing this as the process it recounts really was the catalyst for both the curation of the exhibition and the guest editing of the journal edition. So early last year, I discovered a rivulet environment in the Victorian Highlands while engaged in fieldwork. You can see it here. From here, I used technologies to explore the underwater sounds and the broader landscape of the discovered site, including placing hydrophones in these small nooks. I also noted the glistening light of the snowfields and water surfaces, which you can see here. It is these sounds and lights, the ambience, that came to shape my perception and which I came to embody. I was struck by the site's similar proportions to a laneway. This is hard to imagine. You can see here there's this clearing that was long and thin, if you like, that reminded me of the laneway that you could see in the background of my picture and that you can see here. This is why I chose Yarra Sculpture Gallery, because it had this laneway. I adapted the sounds and lights to 4 aircon shells, which I had worked with in previous works, situating them according to the exact proportions of the 4 discovered rivulets. Note both the flickering of the lights and the playback of the watery sounds being shaped by the aircon's own resonant bodies. During the exhibition, a river appears. It was curious to watch the aircon shells become submerged in an urban river. In the essay, I reflect on what I came to see as the more than human expressions of the original environment via the listening technologies and the laneway with its own evolving vital assemblages. The river extended the installation ambiances even further into the urban and back into the original environment, producing a new, more than human installation, or so it felt. It suggested to me that an arts approach to urban design, which steps outside of the functional programming of space, might create openings for the possibilities of such serendipity. The work, much like the journal and the exhibition itself, was processual. The ideas emerged through practice. In fact, by working with other artists during the exhibition and journal editing process, I came to learn that the translating ambience concept is much more than an urban design proposition. Its conceptual and practical net can be and has been cast much wider. I will now focus on a non-local contributor from each of the 3 categories. I want to be clear that many wonderful and expert examples of practice and scholarship as presented by all of the artists are to be found in this journal. It is simply not possible to discuss them all, although a reading of my editorial provides an informative overview. So I have chosen non-local contributors mainly so the audience have a chance to engage with artists and scholars with which they may not be familiar. Jean-Paul Thibault's essay in the scholarly article category provides a critical framework for this edition. It presents a history of the notion of ambience and its relationship to aesthetics, the ambient term, the atmosphere term, and phenomenology. This was previously a French written article, and this is its first published English translation. Well worth a read to grasp the meaning of the term. And finally, we will now turn to the art and scholarship of Luz María Sánchez. I want to make a quick editorial statement before this. Luz's work is very important for the journal as it reminds us that ambience is not just a concern of aesthetics. It is not just related to the evocations of art or the pleasantries of design. It can just as well deal with fearful, everyday ambiances. And translation can become a political, even journalistic tool that presents other ways of documenting the experiences of those forced to live in difficult, if not dangerous, everyday circumstances. But for here, I will hand over to Luz María Sánchez. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Jordan. Just before we get to Luz, I'd like to thank Jordan for that taste, and I should say sound and sight, of some of the wonderful 19 works in this issue. So thanks, Jordan, so much to think about as always. And it's my great pleasure and honor to introduce Luz María Sánchez Cardona, joining us here from Mexico City. Luz, well, Jordan quickly introduced Luz, but I'll add to that, a bit more formal. Is a transdisciplinary artist, researcher, scholar, and author of 4 books. Her work operates in a political sphere with themes like the Mexican diaspora, violence in the Americas, and the failure of nation states. She is the 2020 recipient of an honorary mention at the esteemed Prix Ars Electronica 2020 Digital Communities for her work Vis, Unnecessary Force 3. Luz is a member of the National System of Art Creators and the National System of Scientific Research, and is a professor at the Department of Arts and Humanities at Universidad Autónoma Metropolitana in Mexico. Luz's incredibly powerful work is thoughtful, deeply effective, and politically compelling. And it's a real privilege that she can be here with us today to explore it further with those who know it and introduce it to those who have not yet experienced it. Over to you, Luz.
Thank you so much, Norie. I hope there's any technical problem. I'm happy to address that in case that there comes any. And well, first of all, I would like to thank the editors and for such a great project. Unlikely to have space really to present art as research. I think that's a need in mainly several institutions. And this is something also that is not as at use in Mexico in general. So is really a space of freedom that for people that is seriously taking all these research projects that the methodology is actually through art practice. So I really appreciate the invitation in general, and specifically of Jordan Lacey, that we had been able to build a dialogue through different issues and ideas and concepts and projects. We've been collaborating in several curatorial and academic kind of projects, and I think that we have found serious connections between both our practices and our research. So thank you also, Jordan, for this space. And of course, it's an honor to be with the list of artists that Jordan selected. Some of them I had the chance to meet and work with, some of them not, but this number 6 of Unlikely is just amazing on the final what we can find on the online number. And so having said that, I'm very happy to be an honor to be here. I need to also thank my university, the Universidad Autónoma Metropolitana, because it's actually through the possibility of this universities, public universities in Mexico, and specifically this university, that I was able to address some of my concerns through artists as research practice. And also there's the Department of Arts and Humanities, where I used to be the chair of the department. There we open up a research area, practices research, transdisciplinary and sound, which actually allows me and some other colleagues to develop these kind of projects. And of course, I need to acknowledge the system, a national system of art creators, which I just joined again back with the new project. And this 3-year grant will allow me to achieve some of the art research projects I'm trying to address now. So I tried to divide my presentation today in 3 parts. One of them will be about my statement, the way my practice develops, which will be very, very succinct. I would like to talk more about the proposal for unlikely, specifically about some of the concepts that you can find on the article, and also about this idea of ambience, this possibility of translation, the politics, which is the area I move, and sound, of course. Another section within this second part of my talk deals with the project This Unnecessary Force, which is a long-term project, which now has 4 art installations, multimedia installations out. It's not closed yet, so it's a project that is driven by a specific art research question that I will present. And I will talk about the 4 pieces. And then I would like to, in the second section, in the third part, talk a little bit about listening practices, which are also addressed through the article, about this possibility of having emotional approach to how we listen, but also forensic and more scientific approach that we could also use, and we'll actually I presented to detail in this article, and I will just to mention that. And finally, in a third moment, I would like to talk about some kind of perspective, very, very short as well, and a little bit about my take on the world we're in now, and how I envision the way my practice may develop. So more than having a text that I could read, I just wanted to go from one concept to the other, one section to the other, and more like in a free way. Finally, the whole idea that I want to share with you and the public here is already contained in the article that is unlikely. So I invite all of the people that is watching this video just to go there and check it out. But I think there are important things that I would like to address in more in an open dialogue way. So maybe we can go later on to this kind of a discussion, and I think that's the part that could be even very interesting to open up to. So this is what I propose as a way of presenting this, and so for my statement, I would like to just share this screen here really fast, which is this one here. This is it's very succinct. This is my statement, but I just wanted to share it with the persons that are here with us now. And if there's any issue about presenting materials that are not properly shared, just let me know. But since 2006, I started my practice. So there's since 2006, the practice with this political view on it, when I was living in the United States, in the state of Texas, actually, and I could see how the Mexican diaspora there and the problems with the economic situation in Mexico was making this movement of people towards the north. Of course, now this diasporic element has been cut short And one may think that maybe it's because the economic situation in Mexico is better, so people's not moving, and that's not the case. People still needs to move north, but now with the violence that is going on in the country, it's mainly impossible to make it to the border. So the crossing the country is becoming a nightmare. So my practice started way before that, but in 2006, I think I was able to start focusing on these issues. And so I'm just sharing this text with you. If whoever wants to know more about it, I mean, it's part in this text that I introduce, and unlikely, but also the political sphere basically is the thing that I have more interest in, because and I think in that sense ambience and politics and sound and these two spaces that Jordan was talking about rural and urban collides. And on the contrary, I believe, and that's the core of my practice, that you can actually translate those moments of fear into another space, because I think one of the main elements or components on my own art production is to try to build some kind of a empathy with the public, because if you don't touch another person with the problem, then the problem gets always being diminished. You know, the problem doesn't exist until until you're not inside of the problem. And if you are not inside of the problem, there's always this kind of emotional barriers that we just put between us and other people. And then as a society, as a collective, is very difficult to evolve. So one of the main things that I've been trying to address through my practice is how can we understand in a deeper way what is going on, because it's very easy just to close your eyes and try to pretend that this is not happening, or since it's not happening to you, in a way you're in a safe area. And we have seen it in other parts of the country. We have seen it in other countries. We have seen it in history, in 20th century and now 21st century, how this gray zone is like growing, and seems like people doesn't care until until it doesn't touch them. So actually being able to translate, I don't know if the moderator could help us a little bit with the cameras of the public. That would be very nice. Actually, the possibility of translation of the space into the exhibition area is very kind of a complicated thing to do. In that sense, just by being able to work within a rural area, work with people that is dealing with a very strong situation within violence, and then trying to bring that over into the museum space is very kind of a complicated thing to do. I'm sorry, I was a little bit, I lost concentration a little bit, I'm sorry. So what I was just wanted to say basically is, it is possible to do it. I think it's necessary to do it. Sometimes it's very complicated. How do you manage to bring this kind of emotions into the exhibition space, which usually is this kind of a pristine, white, perfectly constructed towards this vision to experience an artwork. When you're talking about these things, I don't see my practice as a political one, in the sense that I am not proactive into a movement, but I see it as strongly political in a way that I'm trying to present how there's certain political operations going on, and by exhibiting them, by in a way presenting them as such, to be able to deactivate this operations, so to speak. One of them in Mexico, at least, is extreme violence exerted against civilians by government, police, drug cartels, you name it. It doesn't have to be good and bad groups of people, which is a little bit this kind of a play that they want to set up, you know, like this is people that is good and this is people that is bad. And so they're fighting this kind of a really kind of a clear war. And we hope that the good ones will prevail, and this is not the truth. It doesn't work that way, and that's where necropolitics comes to hand, where also biopolitics come to hand to understand these complexities, and specifically in Mexico, where there's this absence of the state. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that, those concepts, and then I have this a project, as I said, This Unnecessary Force. I'm going to try to share a website where you can find the whole project there, as just the name as it is. And it's going to say open, so I'll just go and share it. And in this website is just the front of the project. You can find the 4 actual pieces, sound and multimedia installations that I've been working in. You have it here, you can see it. You can go and check the 4 projects that are in now. And as I said, one of them is actually the one that was part of Unlikely, This Unnecessary Force #1. And that deals specifically, we'll talk about it a little bit more with some time in, let me see why it's not opening. But This Unnecessary Force #1 deals with this citizens kind of a also / being making testimonies, being witnesses of what is going on, reporting on reality as what is happening. You can find here more of this project specifically. This Unnecessary Force #2 deals with children and specifically with the children from Ciudad Juárez. This is a project I carry out with Verónica Castillo. She is a young scholar, a psychologist, and she's been working with kids that are under a lot of stress because maybe one or the two members of the family, maybe even the parents, were kidnapped, and there's this kind of a legal and emotional gap, so to speak, because there's no closure. They don't have bodies of their parents, so they cannot even think as their parents, as people that are dead now in another level or another space. They're still waiting for them. Their grandparents become their well, not even legal guardians, because there's nobody yet to become legal guardians. So there's even in a regular basis, in a day-to-day, is very problematic. And you may think how these kids try to endure. And so I work with Verónica Castillo Arnal in Ciudad Juárez, and this therapy that she has, arte terapia, through this Criolla kind of elements, so the kids can really talk about their problems and their traumas with different kind of intensity. We are publishing a book together, and there's an article from her talking about her methodology and everything. This Unnecessary Force #3, which is the one that Norie was mentioning when she introduced me, is the one that was awarded an honorary mention in the digital communities category in Ars Electronica this year. And basically is a tool that was conceived to the group of mainly women in this case, but now they're women and men lately, that are looking for their family members that are victims of enforced disappearance. As I said, this is more like a front. These projects are not necessarily to open up to the public at detail because of the kind of information they carry on. So whoever wants to know a little bit more about them, there's contact information there that we can really see who's looking for this information and share it with them. And finally, this unnecessary force, number 4, is it comes out from number 3, which is after working with las rastreadoras del Fuerte in the north state of Sinaloa in Mexico. I was able to record their interactions, and after this, I was actually going to install and start testing the application I developed for them as VIS number 3. And so I record them, and I was part of the search. Each time I went there, I was able to go with them to this kind of a expedition, so to speak, when they're going to the desert, just try to find these illegal graves. And one thing that struck me a lot when talking and being in this kind of a, I've been working with them for more than 3 years now, going visiting a very few times, but a very intense kind of work, because they have a very strong agenda, trying to find out where these victims are. But one thing that was very interesting in a sense is like not just the need that these groups of people have, these collectives, to give testimony. I think testimony is very important for them. Why? Because all the attentions they may get from media, from other people, artists, scholars, whoever comes, is a chance for them to be seen. And they generally have T-shirts or signs with the pictures of the family member they're looking for. So any camera, any possibility of being seen is very important for them. Every opportunity they have to be heard is also very important for them. And so in that sense, I was not. I try to avoid the testimony. I know that they needed that, and I know that they have that kind of spaces for them to talk about that. I rather concentrated on the way they communicate among them. That was very striking. This kind of a really strong network is built among them, which is very, very strong, because they're doing things that, first of all, is very dangerous because they're in the wild, but also dangerous because they can be followed by either these officials that are corrupted, or maybe by cartels. You never know. And so the job they do per se is very difficult. Also, the situation they're in, sometimes even outside of their family or neglected by their family, is very strong, and it has a emotional toll on them. And then the fact that they are out in the wild, just looking for their loved ones with the very minimal tools, it makes the whole thing complicated. So the link they built among them is very strong, but it's also very fragile. As soon as they find the body of their loved one, a lot of them leave the group, and they don't want to come back and listen about that, so it's very strong in a way and fragile in another way. Sometimes it lasts, sometimes it doesn't, because this link that they build is just very for this a specific circumstance. And once the circumstance is finally closed, then things change, so that's piece number 4. And this brings me a little bit more about what we were talking and what Jordan was saying at the beginning, this translation of an ambience. How do you translate just the sounds of the shovels and the desert of Sinaloa into an exhibition space, and how you make people don't feel like they're getting into a obscure complex and complicated issue that you don't want to see, even though you know it happens and it exists, but you know, and how you make people really stay inside of the exhibition space and listen and come out maybe thinking, what is going on? What's happening in this country? What's happening with us as human beings, as species? What is happening here in many levels? Doesn't have to do doesn't have to do with your political approach to things, you know. So it's very complex, and even though I may say that with this specific exhibition, people walk out telling me that in other parts of the country sounds were different, and that they missed that the other way of other areas of Mexico, the talking, you know, the words they use, and also the tools they use, because in other parts of the country, they don't look for their loved ones with shovels. They look with other elements, because the way of these criminal groups of disappearing people is different. And so it requires different tools, different sounds, different things. So I don't know. The other thing I wanted to talk about, because I know time is running and I want to keep it to the 30 minutes that you gave me, is this number one, which is the one that unlikely, and specifically talk about the possibility of reflecting on listening practices. That I think it was part of the conversation that it was open up with Jordan when we were talking about this article. I think it required a lot of dialogue, in a sense, for us and for me specifically, to understand how my own practice, you know, I really like to work this way with editors, how your practice can really grow after this conversation, knowing who is the reader of Unlikely, which I didn't know who was a reader, knowing who is invited to be part of this kind of a platform, publication, arena, you know, and then having really a curatorial kind of a talk with Jordan Lacey was, I think, very, very good. Also to reflect on my own practice, which I think that's a very important part, you know, like it's not just me bringing over something that may interest me, but also what could be really touching certain elements, you know. I think, you know, I try to divide it as more like a creative essay dealing with my practice. And so I'm explaining a little bit what's happening in Mexico as a territory, which I try to do, to work with Mexico as this sonic territory. Of course, there's concepts dealing with necropower, or just the state of exception of Giorgio Agamben is medular for all my practice. It just crosses it all. Trying to talk about fear and how fear is exerted through either sound or through silencing practices, like how we're going to control people. We don't want people to talk. And if they talk, then we're just going to go around the cities and making this kind of cacophony thing with gunshots, you know, which is what we hear with this piece. So I think a little bit what you can find in this article is that I talk about how I see my own practice. I talk specifically about vision as force. The question that crosses the whole art research project is how civilians like you and me survive under these circumstances of extreme violence. And this can happen not just in Mexico. This can happen everywhere, anytime. We have seen it now with this COVID-19 controls and etc., and how we feel like we're, you know, sent to a small space and within our own private universe. But I think I really would like the public to go and check on the article, because it was, actually a very extended one. Like we were discussing the length with Jordan, and he thought it was important to keep the length, which I appreciate that, because in a way the whole reflection, thinking about my own practice came into that. And so I introduced several examples of this, and then we can find just specific sound files. The piece is actually made of 74 to 100 sound files. We presented some of them here. There are more like, I think, important to talk about the main issues that we are trying to address here, which is ambience, politics, and this moving one emotional kind of a sound environment to another place. I think the selection responds to that. There's also details on how this piece was made little by little. All these are sound files that I will not present here. Whoever wants to listen to them, they can either go to my webpage or they can go to Unlikely webpage, and they're invited. But I think one of the ideas that cross this piece and also crosses in general my practice is the importance of the testimony, the importance of having a witness, the importance of talking and living in these gray zones. And I remember when I was doing this keynote address in SETKM in 2017, I was talking about this gray zone where we really need to understand, like, for example, some of the kids that are missing, maybe they were, I don't know, doing, selling some small amounts of marijuana. We don't know, but they didn't deserve to die. They didn't deserve to be taken away from their family members and be killed and be disappeared, like be burned to ashes. So this is the point. For mothers and in general for parents in Mexico is very complicated, because they don't even know what their kids were into, and we should not care about that. We should care about the fact that they were disappeared and killed, period. So we become all of the society as a whole. We become on the big jurors, who the ones that say who is good and who is bad. And I think this is part of the system that we should just show and expose and say, no, this is not what we should be talking about. We should be talking about that it should be unthinkable that somebody that went to work will never come back because somebody just thought he was doing something wrong and he was taken away, period. This cannot be keep on happening in Mexico. So I think this gray zone, this contemporary gray zone, is facilitated actually by the absence of the state. And what I wanted to say when I was mentioning this keynote that I did in 2017, and with this I'm just gonna almost finish, is these actual words that you may recognize from the Second World War and post conflict in 20th century. I was thinking why I need to find new words. We already have those words that are really neat. We need to talk about them again, and we maybe need to rethink about that. Those words and what they mean in our common life. And just to talk about the possibility of a perspective, as I said, we have here among the two pieces that we selected for this forensic listening are historical sound files made by people that were in this night of Iguala, as they call it in Mexico, and that is still now a movement that help give visibility to the fact that there were hundreds of thousands of people disappearing in Mexico. Hundreds of thousands. They don't even know how many they are because they're not counting. So we have those two sound files there about the Iguala night, about these witnesses, about something has been solved. And it has been a big scandal in Mexico, human rights scandal that has escalated internationally. And finally, the perspective about this tendency to the totalitarist situation with the nation states as they are, and how I don't know about other artists, other practices. At least for mine, it's very important to keep an eye on media, on what's going on a street level, and what's going on inside of the houses, and what's going on to have to have the temperature more or less accurate of how we're evolving as a society. And since I work with this, but then I show my work in exhibition space, I'm doing all the time this movement, this exercise of trying to not just bring over a video, to bring the media that is needed to make this empathy become a presence within the exhibition space. And with that, I will end, and I appreciate the invitation both to be part of this journal, and also to be here with you, sharing my artwork. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Luz. I mean, I found your essay so intense and effective to engage with. The sounds, the videos, and what you say about it. And then now to have you reflect on it and contextualize it here has been really, really special. I won't make any more comment now because I want to turn over to Nikos, who is the respondent for these presentations. I'll just quickly introduce Nikos, although he's of course very well known to all of us, as an important research leader at COVA and a major figure nationally and internationally. He's well known and respected for his research and writing on spatial aesthetics, cosmopolitanism and culture, and numerous other significant concerns around cultural identity and public cultures, and art, media, and aesthetics. Nikos is the director of the research unit in public cultures and a professor in the School of Culture and Communication at Melbourne Uni. He's the author of many groundbreaking books. I won't list them all, but including Ambient Perspectives, which is particularly relevant for us today. Nikos is also a highly valued and generous collaborator and colleague, and I'm really appreciative of his offer to be a respondent here today. So over to you, Nikos.
First of all, thank you very much for that very generous introduction, Norie. And I'd also like to take the opportunity to underline and echo your words of acknowledgement and respect to the Indigenous people of Australia and Indigenous peoples in other parts of the world, wherever these images and sounds are being received. I am speaking on Boomerang land in Eastern Kilda, and it gives me great honour to acknowledge the civilizational contribution of those people to us for here and forever. I also express my gratitude for the invitation to participate and respond and hopefully contribute to this very enlightening and stimulating and timely set of presentations. I will begin and end my little presentation with the word risk. I think, Norie, when you introduced the journal, you introduced the concept of risk as a vital part of a journal. A concept that's often overlooked in most journals, which look for validation, not experimentation, speculation, meditation. The open way in which you address the speculative, the meditative, the creative, exposes the journal to failures. It exposes the journal also to the pleasure of discovery and the risk of the new. And I think that's an important quality to emphasize and underline in any venture that goes forth, especially those which supposedly are operating with the auspices of institutions like art schools, universities, and so on. I also take this concept of risk into the middle point between Jordan's definition of ambience and translation, because I love the way in which Jordan straddles these terms and produces a very powerful conjunction. Because I agree with him that they extend and ground each other at the same time by putting them together. And it reminds me of the importance of the way in which we think about art in a complex society. Art that's no longer representing something to someone as if that person and that culture already has their identity to be mirrored back to them, but art that has to infiltrate and implicate itself in the production of that identity and culture that is being made. So it's an interweaving exercise. It's building into the iterative and the discrete and the never to be repeated, but always continuous process of construction of identity. And that conjunction of art as a medium for thinking about translation and ambience brought me to a scene in my mind, which was many years ago now, when the very famous American scholar Ihab Hassan came to Melbourne. He was a regular visitor to Australia. He's one of the groundbreaking literary theorists, one of the first people to use the term postmodern, etc. But he was also a very astute commentator on all realm of issues to do with culture and art, and a very close friend of the Australian art historian Bernard Smith. And he presented a lecture at Melbourne and showed a slide of a painting by the Indigenous artist Rover Thomas, and asked the room with absolute sincerity, what is the meaning of this work? And this was a room full of academics from the humanities and social sciences. Of course, he was not asking for an art historical explanation of the forms. Similarly, he was not asking for an anthropological explanation or decoding of the symbols and their contexts and histories. That he could do for himself. What he was asking was, what is happening that's new in this artwork? How does the old, that, as Jordan reminds us, also comes into the new, that's residual, never quite left behind, also provide a fiber for the constitution of the new? And so it was a very important spur for me for thinking about how translation actually operates. It operates out of something that's solid, but also towards something that's completely unknown. So the void in translation is entirely central to the act of translation. The void, the ambience of the void, what is not there, what has to be made for it to come into being, what is the bridge that is necessary to make a culture speak into the present, a culture that is millennial, that is ancient, that has deep histories, but also has to reinvent itself in the present. These are questions that are not automatic in terms of what our repertoire of knowledge provides, whether when it's trained in the social sciences or the humanities. So there's a deep methodological, epistemological, and moral challenge that comes, a deep risk that comes with the concepts of translation and ambience. And this, briefly, if I can now quickly move on, because I know I'm already at the limit of my time, takes me to the issues and aesthetics that Luz pointed out in terms of the documentation of the precarious. Here we encounter images where violence and erasure are at stake. And the tension of disappearance in our privileged, luxurious, and almost ridiculously too safe society like Australia, we often think that the greatest risk in terms of our violence of the disappearance of image comes from the aggregation of multitudes, from the flux, from the plenitude, not from the violence of disappearance. I was reminded of an artwork by an artist from Mexico who collaborated with a friend of mine here, Tony Garofalakis, in Melbourne, where he in the gallery, he installed, I can't remember how many, but it was 30 or 40 car tires. Because that is the number of car tires that are necessary to make a fire intense enough and long enough so that the body that is thrown into that pile of tires will be pulverized to the point that it's no longer recognizable and decodable by any other method. So the violence that Luz is taking us, which is a story that has I've been exposed to through art references by the work of the curator Cuauhtemoc Medina, who has worked with artists like Edgardo Aragon, Pedro Reyes, Enrique Jesic, and Teresa Margolis. They've also explored this politics of necrocapitalism and narco-politics. And one of the things that struck me, especially in Cuauhtemoc's account of what motivates the participation in these drug cartels, is the banality of pragmatism. Not just the evil of violence, but also the banality of pragmatism. And Luz also outlined this when she says the absence of the state, the collapse of institutions, the destruction of social structures, family structures, community structures, means that the economic opportunities, the subjective models for masculine identification are completely reconfigured and catapulted into a total perverse zone of survival. Teresa Margolis made some very powerful works for the Venice Biennale, where she collected blood samples from the scenes of these crimes, mixed it with water, the blood, the actual blood of the victims who were otherwise disappeared, and used that water to clean the surface of the gallery in Venice. Another very powerful evocation where the empathy for the disappeared is compelled and propelled into our experience. This is a very complex challenge, to which I think Luz pointed out to, is how do we deal with these conjunctions, these issues about recuperating the dead and remembering the dead? How do we deal with this way of presenting this without getting caught into the orgy of violence itself, compelling the audience to be in this sort of violent catapult, avant-gardist almost, jarring of the senses, jolting you into some sort of kind of action? I don't think this is the strategy that is being presented to us today. Something different, something more subtle, something more that is, in a sense, getting under our skin. And going back to Jordan's point about ambience as being an embodied perception, shaping not only your perceptions, but from there informing your impressions of the world. And so to end, I was really moved by this idea of using images of the dead as a t-shirt in order to find more exposure of yourself, and there's the risk again, that you will also get caught in the chain of violation, and also exposure to the grief and the psychology of the dead, and the issues of bereavement and the search for finality or understanding. So these accounts of ambience today are full of risk, full of experimentation, and full of subtlety that allows us to rethink the way in which an image enters the body. Thank you.
Thanks, Nikos, as ever, so thoughtful and engaged, and I think a really good opening to a discussion. So I'm wondering if any of the audience has anything they'd like to say, comments, questions, emotions. Do you want to either just unmute your audio to make a comment? I'll just speak into the void, take the risk, speak into the void while we wait. I mean, you might want to also put your comment in the chat panel if you don't feel ready to speak it. But yeah, I think Nikos, bringing these presentations together around the term of risk. I think that was really, I think, a good opening for me to connect them. And also, you know, the whole idea of, you know, Luz's concern with creating empathy. I mean, that is always a risky endeavor for an artist, like how to create empathy without going down the path of sort of determining what people's response will be, but more opening the possibilities of empathy. And I feel like it's both through the big story of the disappearances and the violence that you address, but also the small stories. I mean, for me, in your work, listening to those sounds of the gunshots and seeing those videos that people took on their little domestic devices, you know, that sort of not well produced, but really intense and immediate. To me, I really, you know, talking about embodiment and embodied affect that happens through ambience, for me, that really brought that to me. Like I felt that, you know, the sort of shock of it, the intensity of it, and the surprise and horror and fear, all of those things in those sounds. I mean, sound being so important. And in those little videos, I found those small, intimate stories, you know, it got under my skin, as someone was talking about. Maybe it was Nikos. So yeah, it did infiltrate and implicate itself, as Nikos said. Does Jordan or Luz, do you want to respond to what Nikos said? Or anyone? Oh, Michael Grieve. Would you like to speak, Michael?
Hi, everyone. It's hard to follow up those beautiful, considered thoughts and translations. I just thought Nikos's idea of risk was interesting, and I think the challenge that Jordan has brought to me with the curatorial work and a number of the articles was how do we pay attention? When do we pay attention, and how do we translate those attentions? And I think I thought around Luz's description of political tension, really. The overseen there is the call to, and the call to translate. I guess the other risk, I think, for me is that whenever we're trying to translate, things get lost in that process at the same time as we're drawing attention to certain parts. So there are all those gains and losses, and there's a divergence between the two. And I think our inability to take everything in is one of the joys of needing to translate and feeling the desire to translate. And I think I guess that comes through that feeling that there is something at stake, and that can be political, that can be poetic, that can be just the joy in an environment in that we're in, sonic in this case, in this context. But there is so much information, we're constantly needing to figure out what's worth responding to.
I just point out to people who haven't fully looked at the issue that Michael is one of the wonderful contributors to this issue. So check out his work.
Thank you. Well, I would like to say thank you, Michael, but thank you, Nikos. I think your response opens up for another layer of the possible dialogue. When you're talking about this, yes, risk concepts, you know, when we're translating things from one ambience to the other, or we're trying to, and of course as also Michael says, there's things that are missing, that they don't go into the other place. And of course, the artist is the one selecting what data is going and what data is staying out. As I said, when I was working with these women, I decided to leave out the testimony, even though they wanted to give testimony, because they need people to know about that. But in a way, my feeling is like, at least in it may happen everywhere, but at least in Mexico, there's this kind of a barrier towards feeling uncomfortable with reality. You know, I was also working in another kind of a article for another publication, where they asked me to reflect on nature and environment, and I came to the same situation. We as species, we humans, it's like we don't care about what's going on. We may talk about violence. We may say, oh my God, there's hundreds of thousands of people dying in Mexico. What's going on? But then we just pass the page. We don't think about it anymore. It's like it's not happening to us as species. We hear about what happens in Africa, in Europe, in North America, South America. I work, when Norie was saying about that, how do you approach that? You cannot approach these things with a drone kind of a, you know, kind of a just like overflowing on top of a little town. You need to go there. You need to be patient. You need to hear. You need to understand, and not just to come and serve yourself as an artist or as a scholar. You just need to understand what the community is looking for and what can be helpful for them. And so, in that sense, yes, it's complicated, and I think that this is very, very strange to say, you know, but we as a species, like, it seems like nothing we do is something that will touch us. And it applies for environmental issues and applies for political and human rights issues. It's like we are not touched by reality. We just tend to neglect the possibility of these things happening in the real world. It's like something like that, you know. So I've been questioning myself, my practice as well, you know, with the limits of this, and that's why it's so difficult to try to really build empathy. But if we don't do that, then we're just talking to the void. So what, you know, what will be the reason to do it? But thank you. I appreciate a lot, Nikos and Michael, also your comments. Thank you.
Sophie, let's hear your question. Can you unmute?
Hi, Norie. Hi, thank you very much for hosting this along with Jordan. I was really intrigued by your presentation, Luz, and I'm not familiar with the work, and I'm very much looking forward to listening to it. But it sounds extremely intense, and I feel like I'm hearing your overarching concern with the production of a sort of space of affect and empathy for this, you know, extraordinary project, Unnecessary Force in its various iterations. And I'm wondering if you can speak a little more about the kind of political intent underlining your practice in terms of what you sort of desire the audience to do with this experience of empathy in the face of violence. I mean, I realize it's a sonic practice and you're exploring sonic violence, but do you feel that it is primarily educative in its intent, and particularly for a non-Mexican audience, in order to familiarize them with these kind of gruesome political realities? Or do you want us to sit in a kind of space of affective political discomfort? I guess that's just some, you know, if you can respond to that in terms of what you sort of really want from your audiences with these works.
Well, when I was actually working with, it was Cuauhtémoc Medina who invited me to do this piece at the Museum of Contemporary Art. The University Museum in Mexico City has a sound space, and so he invited me to come, and I was in conversation also with the major curator Amanda de la Garza about what to do with this specific piece. And then I start drawing like the limits, like I don't want to do testimony. I don't want this to become a political piece against a political agenda of some kind of sort way. I was just trying to do what I'm trying to build when I said about empathy is because I feel like if I approach this subject from with that objective in mind, people will catch it and then will just walk away or walk through with not compromising themselves emotionally or intellectually. So it's mainly in general. My question is very straightforward: how civilians survive situations of extreme violence under the absence of the state or the complete failure of the state? How do you work? How do you live? How do you survive? How do you go to how do you go back to the office in case that you're not the one taking away, of course, you know? So by showing these operations at the political operations, by showing those, I try to at least in a way, if not deactivate it, but at least people like start thinking about about what is there on the real world, about what I want from them. I honestly, I don't want anything. If they could just spend a little bit of time there and think about an issue. I actually not even, I avoid presenting my own opinion on things. I try always to have the space where I present my exhibition as an open arena for whoever, whatever they think is acceptable in a way, you know, accepted, I want to say, because what I want is like to go beyond those kind of lines and present a human tragedy on the making. I mean, we're going to have a problem from here on. Look at Colombia. 30 years from now, 40 years from now, 50 years from now, these people missing, no records, no nothing. This is going to be a major problem. It is now, but it is going to be a major problem in 20, 30 years. All these kids that are growing up without parents, with no kind of a help from the state, no therapy, no nothing. They're going to become angry, very, very angry adults if they make it, because also they're taking away when they grow to be part of these sicario and guerrilla groups. You know, so I feel like by just living our life as usual, you know, it's normal. We're trying to avoid the conflict and the actual tragedy. And I would say that I was writing this other article about other things, and I came to the same conclusion. How can it be that we're now trying to talk about sound ecology and the anthropos and the non-anthropos and the Anthropocene and whatever, and at the end, we humans feel like this is not going to touch us either. I mean, the final collapse, either by wars or by pollution. And so we keep on throwing our garbage in the curb, you know, without thinking, where are we going? So I think it goes more than what I want the people to feel or think when they are in a space. It definitely is not an education objective. It's just like sharing my questions, you know, questioning somebody else, like, haven't you thought about this? What do you think about this? How do you deal with this? How can you just walk away knowing this? And I have been, let's say, lucky that I know that people that walk away and they're not the same. They're really thinking, oh my God, maybe, you know, and they start thinking in terms of sound and this kind of tragedy and like this one that is an unlikely is very, very moving. And each one of those recordings is a complete like sound construction of a moment of fear and desperation. It's amazing how you hear people talking among each other, and they're very clear with these little microphones that are in this little kind of cell phones. You can catch the reality, because I didn't edit, I didn't do anything to them, I not even clean them. I just present them as they were. So I don't know if that answers the question, but thank you for the interest. Yeah.
Nikos, Jordan, did you want to say anything further?
Well, I'd like to thank Nikos for his response, and of course, thank you, Luz, also for your amazing talk. Nikos, thanks for the generosity of your response around the translating ambience concept. I was really interested when you spoke about risk also, and you mentioned that there are fields or journals that are more interested in validation than risk. And that really spoke to me. So I wanted to ask you a question about artistic research, not as opposed to, but as different from arts practice or research about arts. Is artistic research, in your view, something within itself as part of the academy? And is it more about risks than most types of research that we engage in?
That's a really tricky question to end the symposium.
Sorry about that.
but because there are convergences and profound divergences. Of course, part of what artistic practice does is commensurate with what science does, which is to look to test a proposition and to find confirmation of an assumption, or to discover variation on previously known forms. Artists are doing that all the time. And similarly, there is divergences whereby artists are speculating and putting forward a concept, which in itself, just the mere putting forward of that concept, is a discovery. It may come to nothing, but it's a provocation, or it's a meditation, or it's an invitation that's full of possibility. Now, in a sense, scientists can say, yes, we do that too, but then you have to put the hypothesis to the laboratory, etc., and demonstrate the path you've taken to confirm or dispute or deny the validity of that proposition. But I think what is interesting and distinctive about creative practice is the right to say, here it is, and experience it for what it is, before we have, or in the absence of, full validation and verification. And the distinctive challenge that comes from that, which separates it from the social sciences or humanities or hard sciences, is that that experience of a proposition has a kind of fullness, embodiedness, intellectual curiosity, empathic, affective spheres that makes it worthy. Now, how you demonstrate the validity and value of that is beyond capture in some times. Yeah. Other times it is definable and measurable. But I think that's where the divergence also occurs between creative practice and science and conventional forms of other forms of validation. It's a debate that the Australian Research Council, for the many times I've been involved in them, has never been able to resolve. And I'm forever stunned by the capacity by which some really brilliant scientists, when they think about art, think of it in the most romantic cliches that are available. But let's not descend into those disappointing spheres, but try and end with the evocation, as Luz says, of an experience which does have a pedagogic, it does have an educative value, but is not reduced to that. It has something else that compels us to stop and think, and to reflect, and to imagine and meditate even, and even imagine in ways that we didn't know how to imagine before. And so what I think is central to both your and to Luz's account, again, is the limits of our blasé attitudes. How is it that a little river and a laneway, a clearing in nature and a laneway in urban culture have a powerful resonance with each other? How is it that if we stop to think about all the things that we are exposed to, we would struggle to move 2 steps in our everyday life? But somehow we have put shields that make us think that we're impermeable and impregnable. And as a consequence, we don't see the connections between a laneway and a riverway. We don't see our complicity with the Anthropocene and the violence of narco-capitalism in our everyday consumption behavior. As a consequence, we excuse ourselves from our own culpability. And I think one of the greatest challenges right now is this demolition of our own blasé attitudes.
What an absolutely perfect way to end. Thanks, Nikos. And it's good to have that sort of positive, in a way, or sense of a way forward, because in these terrible times, it is possible to despair about art and what's the point and what can it do. And I think this issue of unlikely and this discussion and what you've just said really, I think, helps break down that sort of immobilizing sense of despair. So thank you for that. And thanks, Luz, for that amazing presentation and for your work, of course. And to Jordan, again, for a wonderful presentation and for just the outstanding job you did with editing this journal. I mean, dealing with 19 contributors is pretty intense, I know, and Jordan just did it with such care and concern. It's inspiring.
With a lot of background support from Norie, I might add.
Anyway,
support, so thank you. Thank you too, Norie.
Everyone who's come, and I know a lot of people say they intend to listen or to engage with the recording that'll be up on the COVA site. So for those people who didn't make it today, hello to you and hope you've enjoyed it. And same to all of you here. Thank you.
Oh,
Thanks, Norie.
thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Luz. Thanks, Nikos. Thank you, everybody.
Over to Eleanor to take us out.